Hello, I'm Geshe Dadul Namgyal. Welcome to this episode of Ladakh Donmay. I'm very honored to have been invited here to share my thoughts and feelings with you, particularly on the topic of how to cultivate our well-being, more particularly mental well-being and mental happiness. In this regard, I cannot help but think of the two opening stanzas in Dhammapada, where Buddha summarizes the fact that the source of our happiness is in the mind. Likewise, the source of our pain and suffering also lies in our mind. So basically, it boils down to dealing with our mind appropriately, that we can handle this crucial aspect of our life. Irrespective of whatever we may be going through, if we could be more focused and more equipped in dealing with our mind, then we'll be able to sail through the situations pretty sensibly and pretty happily. When we speak of mind, basically we will be speaking of two components of the mind, namely the emotions and the cognitive components. So with regard to emotions, what I meant is we tend to give in to certain habits in emotionally reacting to situations. We tend to be more mechanical in responding to situations emotionally. So here, if we become aware of our mind and train in the habit of checking with our mind every once in a while, we will be able to do better in terms of responding to situations with what kind of emotions we want to, rather than having to be dictated or rather than having to be dragged into a particular way of thinking or way of reacting. So in this regard, I can think of our habit of being so self-centered and self-obsessed. That's one kind of a emotion that we tend to give into a lot and suffer from much. Although yes, this is natural for us to be self-centered, to be self-obsessed, to be too protective in our effort to guard our own well-being. But in a way, it turns out to be a mistaken approach. Given that we have this natural aspiration for happiness and freedom from suffering, the most appropriate way to go about achieving that would be to train in more altruistic way of thinking, train in a way we are more considerate of others, because our life is so dependent on others. We just have to depend on others. There's just no other way. So becoming too protective kind of shuts us down to that fact of interdependence, and kind of it narrows our space and makes our life terrible. So that's one area where we could bring in a change in terms of responding to situations emotionally, instead of giving in to too self-obsessed, self-centered, protective way of relating to things. If we could be more open-minded, more caring, and more respectful of others, then you could see a sea of change in how our thoughts and actions spring out of that in a much more beneficial way. Another area that I spoke of earlier is outlook, perspective. In this regard, I can give you an example. We tend to have this belief that things are clear-cut, fixed, cut out things, and we tend to then believe into that and tend to think of things in this departmentalized way, whereas in reality things are very connected and very fluid, amenable to change. So just as the saying goes, we have to be warned against this gap between reality and appearance. Very often when I go to malls and cities, I come across this warning sign where it says "mind your gap," every now and then I'm right away reminded of the fact that we need to be, of course, mindful of the gap in there, but more so of the gap between appearance and reality. So if we could be more aware of that, and then we'll be able to bring in more appropriate ways of looking at things, and thus not unnecessarily succumb to our tendencies of fixated thinking. So in this regard, how can we be effective in bringing about these mental responses, sensible mental responses, rather than giving in to mental reactions? In this regard, it is good to first understand our own mechanism of how things work, in terms of how, when we say we feel things, we are weighed down by sufferings, pains, whatnot. Basically, it is at the level of the mind. So if we could be mindful of our own mental states every now and then, cultivate this habit of checking our mind every once in a while, then at the very least we will be presented with a choice of how to approach it, rather than be blindly dragged into it and only realize it when it is already too late. So cultivate this habit of checking one's mind, coming back to one's mind every once in a while. You know, on Facebook, you see the moment you open your Facebook account, you will see on your Facebook wall where it prompts you of your response, asking what's on your mind. Every now and then, when I see that, I'm tempted to saying, my mind is on my mind, because that's very crucial. We need to be mindful of our mental state every now and then. So if we could cultivate that habit by first reminding ourselves of how we work, how we function as a human being, of how we originate at our mental level, and then from there go forward in making our expressions through body, speech, mind, etc. If we could understand that properly, appreciate that fact, and then train in the fact of coming to our mind every now and then that could go a long way in really transforming our mind, equipping us or empowering us, as if you will, with the choice before us every step of every step of our life. So that's what I think is very essential in promoting our well-being. So basically what I'm saying is that circumstances can be very hard on us, and very often they can be out of our control. But in terms of how we relate to circumstances, how we receive them, how we perceive them, how we approach them, that part is the subjective part of ourselves. That's where the mental states come in, and that's where we have more say than we usually think. Our own mind, our own mental states, they do not need to be dictated by others. There we have more say and more. We have more say than we usually think, than we usually avail of. So that part needs to be understood at our own experiential level through small steps every now and then, beginning with remembering how we function as a being originating from mind. So that way, if we could do that and train in that, then we would see how we'll be able to face the situation in a much more sensible way. In fact, every situation presents a spectrum of possibilities, whereas when we are caught up in our own narrow-mindedness, caught up in our own mental afflictions or whatnot, then we lose sight of that space. We lose sight of that spectrum of possibilities and kind of become narrow-minded and kind of being pushed through just one tunnel of perspective or one tunnel of emotion. That's what makes our life very vulnerable and very terrible. And the way to avoid that, get over with that, is by training in coming back to our mind every once in a while. And that will only come if we consistently train in that. And then what happens is, if we build that habit, every once in a while we will find ourselves. We will recognize our state of mind, be that calm or a disturbed state of mind. When we find ourselves in a disturbed state of mind, then that kind of awareness will remind us of what needs to be done, like taking a deep breath, few rounds of deep breath, by counting our breath, by coming back to our own sense of calmness, kind of by drawing from our own innate sense of peace, innate sense of calm, which is always within our reach, with us, except we do not seem to succeed in availing it. And that in that we will succeed only when we remember, only when we recognize what state of being we are in the first place, and then know what needs to be done. So basically what I'm suggesting is cultivate this habit of keeping one's mind on one's mind. Cultivate this habit of coming back to one's mind every once in a while. Of course, one would not want to overdo this, every checking overly, but every once in a while, if we remember to come back to our mind, and particularly at the outset of any particular meeting, any particular major event that we are going to face, if we could take a moment in checking our mental state, that would go a long way in really making a difference in how we proceed forward, how whatever situation we may be facing in turns out to be a sector. So that's how we'll be able to run our day rather than let the day run us. Basically, if we could be aware of our mental state, then we would be presented with the choice to make amendments if there is any need. Whereas if we become completely oblivious of that, and completely forgetful of that, completely unaware of that, then we would be dragged by whatever negative habits we may be cultivating unknowingly or knowingly. And that's what usually happens, and we tend to blow up situations out of proportion and tend to then suffer. Usually it is very true, as the saying says, that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. Reality, if we could understand it for what it is, then particularly if we could then approach that with a positive mental outlook and positive emotion, then I think pretty much every situation in life can be handled more or less positively. But if we give in to our own wild imaginations and let ourselves be completely, sabotaged by it, then even a small situation could appear very big to us, unsurmountable to us, and then unnecessarily suffer under the weight of that imagination. So again, in this regard, it is by cultivating this habit of coming back to our mind and see what's happening. Are we being taken on a ride by a wild imagination, or are we realistic in our assessment of the situation? So that way we'll be able to then bring in the right perspective and the right emotion to face the situation. So basically what I'm suggesting is look into ourselves and get to know ourselves and see if there's truth in the saying that it is the mind that is the source of be that happiness or suffering. If that's the case, then we need to be doing more in caring after our mind than we usually tend to do. And the way to do that, the first step to do that, is to cultivate this habit of coming back to our mind, checking that, and then making any amendments that need to be and that way approach the situation with a sense of control, with a sense of our own say into it, rather than be dictated by the situation. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you very much.